Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed the first two talks. I found them absolutely remarkable and very different, talking about different things, but really both of them talking about how modern technology is really changing how things work in this whole area. Now, technology is important, but I think the reality is that we have to have legislation and regulations to make this something that is adopted by everybody in the construction industry. If we just have a couple people doing it, that may be good for their company, but it is certainly not good for the whole, all of society. And so I think that a number of jurisdictions around the world are realizing that we have to do something at the legislative and regulatory level. Now, in North America, the poster child of this is Colorado. It's incredible what Colorado has done. And we're fortunate today to have Rob Martindale, who works for the Colorado DOT, and who is a surveyor. He's a PLS in Colorado. So he's not only somebody who knows what's happening at the legislative and regulatory level, policy level, but also what's actually happening out in the field. And so I think I'm really looking forward to Rob's talk to enlighten us on how this worked in Colorado and maybe give us some pointers on how we can make something like this work in other jurisdictions. So Rob, it's your floor.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I certainly appreciate it. I don't know if I'm a poster child for really anything, but that was great to say that we have been working extremely hard in Colorado to try and change how we deal with utilities. And I think over the years we've had some struggles with the lack of utility information in our right of way. And so I want to make sure that you guys are seeing my screen correctly. I think you are. So again, yes, my name is Rob Martindale. I'm the Utilities Program Manager at the Colorado Department of Transportation. I have over 20 years of construction, land surveying, and GIS management experience, also some engineering background as well. But like Jeff said, my primary profession is professional land surveying. I'm currently located at our headquarters branch in Denver, Colorado. My primary responsibilities in my job is providing, improving CDOT's subsurface utility mapping program and utility data management systems overall. And so today I want to talk about a mix of legislation and regulation and how it mandated change in Colorado's underground infrastructure mapping, and in an effort to reduce, the growing number of damages to utilities and project claims and delays from lack of accurate utility information. We had some one-call legislation that was revised in 2018 to include subsurface utility and engineering in accordance with the American Society of Civil Engineering Standard, ASCE 38. And then along with that, we established some accountability and enforcement along with that, which is increasingly important. So what has been historically the problem with our agency and with dealing with utility companies and records, and this is not new to anybody on this forum, but poor data provided by the utility companies and pipeline companies as far as as-built data or records that are old or outdated, lost, or simply just never existed to begin with, is certainly something that we've recognized in our world. And so any records that do exist are often inconsistent. The quality is unknown, and the content is sometimes unknown as well. So records in different formats, that's definitely a challenge when you have CAD files, GIS files, paper copies, PDFs, whatever it might be, and trying to merge all that together to try and figure out what is actually in our right of way or in our project limits. So CDOT as a whole, we definitely looked at what are the advantages to moving quicker into a subsurface utility mapping environment. Why are we interested? Well, having more attribute data about each utility enables more efficient, productive coordination with utility owners. So if we have, the size of their pipes, the material, the age, whatever it might be. That's that attribute information that gives us more information on what is in our right-of-way, what is in our project limits, and then it helps us convey. And some of the utility owners may not even know what they have in our system. So it helps us when we spend the money to capture that level of information. So, knowing the location and depth, this is extremely important. We've been talking about 3D a lot this morning, and very much is an important part of utilities. I mean, subsurface is that. It's subsurface, and a lot of times we survey two-dimensional paint marks on the ground, and that is what is used all the way through engineering design and into construction, and that obviously leads to costly delays and costly relocations that may not even need to happen. So, but another big thing for us is during construction and leveraging this data with our contractors, with inspectors on the boots on the ground, to use the mapping systems that accurately display the location and depth of those utilities, and also existing, but then the proposed utilities. So I'll show you examples of that in a little bit. But for us, it was really finding a single source or a single platform where we can have all of our data in one place, so that we can leverage that again for all these future projects, or for the existing end users that are working simultaneously around our state on many projects. They can be using the same platform. So let me jump into just a little bit of the legislative changes that kind of pushed us into this subsurface mapping world to really gather data more efficient. And so back in 2015, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, issued rules with new criteria, procedures for determining the adequacy of state damage prevention enforcement programs. One criteria in this inclusion of an enforcement mechanism in each state's one-call law, which something Colorado did not have. We did not have an enforcement mechanism built into our one-call law, which was problematic and could affect federal funding in the future as far as that goes. And so that was 2015. We recognized we had this issue, and it was definitely something that was on the radar to address, but as you'll see, it took several years to get there. In the meantime, we had more damages, and we had an explosion in April 2017, Firestone, Colorado, that was featured and showcased on many levels as this could be avoided, this could have been prevented. Poor records led to this, and lack of locating, and so there was all kinds of push from stakeholders, including our Colorado Contractors Association, our American Council of Engineering group, ACEC, and CDOT. There was a lot of stakeholders, but it was really pushed by two representatives, and they were bipartisan, really. Senator Ray Scott, Republican, and Senator Kerry Donovan, a Democrat, co-sponsored this bill in 2018 to revise our one-call statute, which you can see there was signed by our governor in 2018, May 25th. And what I'll explain here is how this legislation applies to the agency and to contractors, but it was more impactful to the agency than it was overall to the contractors. So what we looked at from the agency side in the one-call law revision was the new requirement for subsurface utility engineering. And what it said is, in the beginning of the legislation, or in the legislation, it requires CDOT, or the agency, to notify the one-call center if we have a SUE required project. And I'll talk about the criteria that we evaluate here shortly. But assuming we have met those criteria, then it's a requirement of the agency to engage the one-call center with a SUE engineering notification, or a SUE subsurface utility engineering notification, and that requires the utility owners to provide their best available records. That could be marking in the field, it could be their paper copies, it could be other information, whatever it might be. Best available records can then mean a lot, but it is something that's in the law that requires a 10 business day return on that information, which is certainly important to have some sort of accountability on that request by utility owners. And then the project owner must, and that's the agency in this case, provides a stamped plan depicting the utilities at their achieved quality level. And I'm not going to explain all the quality levels. I assume most on the forum understand the ASC 38 quality levels. If not, please sit for Jim's talk here in a little bit. He'll definitely give you the quality level details that you need on all the quality levels. But CDOT will achieve quality level or attempt to meet or exceed the ASC 38 quality level B and quality level A at potential conflicts with new gravity fed systems, or document reasons why not. So there's a high expectation that the SUE plans will achieve a quality level B, and then at the potential conflicts that will actually test hole and locate those utilities on our subsurface utility engineering stamp plans. And so that's the expectation. Now, there is reasons why we don't achieve quality level for everything, and there's notes and explanations on our plans why not. And that's really up to the engineer of record what they are certifying to and documenting. So the 811 excavation notice did not change. It's still a 3-day notice. Basically, it's 3 days to mark utilities for excavation. One new thing that did change in our law was the underground facilities must be electronically locatable when installed, and that became effective when the law became effective, which was August of 2018. So it was signed into law, and then the effective date was actually August. And then we became a true one-call center where we didn't have Tier 2 members anymore, and that was really an issue that we saw in Colorado, because Tier 2 members, even though they were part of the one-call system, they were not notified through the one-call clearinghouse. The one-call center would issue the Tier 2 members' phone numbers to the requester, and then the requester would have to contact those Tier 2 members directly for locates. That didn't always happen, as you can imagine, and so there was a lot of Tier 2 facilities that were not marked for construction and or even for engineering purposes. So as you can imagine, that creates problems because they show up at times and usually at the most inopportune time. So finally, the creation of a underground damage prevention safety commission was when I spoke about PHMSA in 2015, they recognized we did not have an enforcement mechanism, and this was created to satisfy that requirement with PHMSA. And so this damage prevention commission is 15 members. It's very broad as far as the representation. It includes transportation, includes engineering, includes utility companies. There's Colorado Contractors Association has a seat. So it brings all the stakeholders together to create best practices and training to prevent damage. Adheres, to documenting different standards and working through that process. But most importantly, they review complaints. And if there is a complaint on, for example, a notification to a utility company that's not providing their best available records within 10 business days, a complaint can be registered, and then the commission can then issue fines and levy fines anywhere from $250 to $75,000, depending on the penalty or the severity of the penalty, and how many times the company or is being brought, how many complaints are being levied and how many times fines are being issued. So that could start to really multiply as things go forward. So The Safety Commission link is shown here if anybody's interested in seeing what we're up to from the Safety Commission side of it. So with those changes in the one-call legislation requiring SUE in the pre-construction side, Colorado became an ASC 38 state. Right now we're at 3802, but our law is tied to ASC 38. And so whatever the current version is, which when 3821 comes out, or if whatever version is current, will be applicable to our law. And so CDOT moved into a SUE implementation period after August of 2018. So we looked at our process, our utility project process delivery. And so when we look at providing a total utility project management, we look at the 5 stages that you see here. This is starting at planning and moving through design, 30% design. Sorry, I'm next to a railroad track, if you can't tell. Apologize. And then we moved to 30% design, and then on to 30 to 90% design, and then to our 90 to 100% design, and then out to construction. But as you will see, our SUE activities are tracking on the top, and our utility coordination activities are tracking from planning through construction. And they run parallel paths, and they do share a lot of effort with each other when it comes to sharing SUE data, collecting SUE data, providing it to our utility coordination team, and then also conveying that back to our designers as we move through the process. When you look at the one-call law and this first planning stage, we have a design scoping review, the DSR, and you can see I've referenced the legislative site in there as far as where the subsurface utility engineering notification happens in the planning stage. So this is that new process that we must provide notice to the utility or the one-call center, and then the utility companies are advised that they must provide those best available information or records or marks on the ground within 10 business days. But during this planning process, CDOT is looking at the 4 requirements of SUE, and these are the 4 requirements that we evaluate every project on that are in the law. And the law states that any project that involves a construction contract with a public entity is criteria number 1. So that's that's all of our projects at CDOT. And then same with this one. The project is primarily horizontal construction, not buildings or vertical. Excavation exceeds 2 feet in depth and a contiguous 1,000 square feet or involves a utility boring. And then finally, the project is designed by a professional engineer. So we look at the project scope, we look at the criteria, and I would say more than 95% of the time our projects meet all 4 criteria. And so if they do, then we move into what's called a SUE required project. And so and I'll show you that here in a second. And with the SUE required project, it's at the project owner's expense, and that will meet and exceed the 38 standard quality level B. So during our 0 to 30% design stage, we initiate that SUE required project, and then that means during planning we procure the SUE vendor. We then have those records through the SUE notification, and at 0% design, in theory, that's where the SUE investigation begins per ASC 38 standards, and the SUE required project then initiates, and we look to have our quality level B information back by 10% design. And this is a goal to allow our designers time to actually leverage the good existing utility data against their future designs. And if they don't, then this can cause delays and sometimes rework on designs if we don't have this utility data early enough in our design. So what is an attempt to achieve quality level B in definition of ASC 38 standards? Well, it's records research, it's survey tied to a project datum, geophysical investigation, and then professional engineering judgment, knowledge of geophysics, construction practices, utility design principles, and then, correlation of all of those things into determining what level, quality level is assigned to each segment of existing utility information. And so that's what you're seeing on the right. This is an example of some of our SUE plans that have been delivered by our SUE consultants. Some of the subsurface utility engineering plans, again, SUE required project, SUE notification, the depiction of the utilities stamped ASC 38 standards, any reasoning why they're not at quality level B is applied, and then any reasonable rationale, again, by the PE in charge of the quality levels is required. And then, again, the quality level A for underground facilities at the point of a potential conflict with a gravity-fed system is a requirement. And so, again, this is what's built into our SUE plans. And as we move into, CDOT had moved into a new process of capturing the SUE data during our workflows. And what it entailed was capturing the data, high accuracy GIS data first by our SUE investigations. And so we have a process that we've developed where we site calibrate our GIS mobile app. The data is collected by the SUE vendors in this app, so we're able to capture this GIS data into our GIS database for utilities, and then move it through a process where we take it all the way through engineering level deliverables. And so this example is GIS data capture first on existing utilities, delivered to our microstation environment, and then ultimately delivered with quality levels and a stamped certification by the SUE vendor that this meets the ASC 3802 standards at this point. But where we take this SUE data that's been required by our legislation now, we leverage it through our design principles. Like I said, from 0 to 30% design, we're using it to build new potential conflicts with new improvements. Like this example on the screen is new storm drain line, and you can see all the flags of potential conflicts. But we have quality level B, quality level C, we have quality level B gas lines in here. So we have a good idea of how the quality levels and understanding of the certainty of that data horizontally, and then we can then move to test holes and hopefully find those much quicker than if we didn't have quality levels assigned to it. So we leverage, again, this data for a three-part process with our designers: avoidance, accommodation, and relocation. So using good utility data, existing utility data, we can either redesign to avoid something that may be a costly or time-consuming relocation on the utility side. We might be able to accommodate the utility and just adjust in place or notch out a wall or foundation, whatever it might be, or we have to go into a full-fledged relocation of the utility, but it then helps us leverage that with the utility companies that we have vetted every possible design criteria, and we've spent the money to investigate their utilities as a whole. So we define this further into a conflict matrix. We take this quality level B information and push it, further into identifying the true conflicts. But more importantly, as we get to construction, we then push this data back from CAD. So we spent the time designing with this information. In this example in CAD, we designed new storm drain based on the SUE deliverable. We've then pushed it back to our mobile app for then our contractors to use. And you can see their contractors will then have the ability to see the existing utility information and proposed. So you can see the storm drain lines that are in there is proposed. And so as they're getting ready to initiate excavation or excavation locates, they have this at their disposal so that they can identify any conflicts with the locating that's happening for excavation versus what we had during the SUE investigation, so it can be resolved rather quickly. But they can also document any new potholing or test holing that they're doing for excavation, and they can also document with photo sketches and forms on the actual construction as well. So I know this was kind of high level and quick, but I wanted to give you guys a quick overview of what we're doing in Colorado, and I appreciate the time today, and I welcome any questions at this time.
Thanks a million, Rob. I think that was really clear how this happened in Colorado. I have a couple of questions that I think. First, about the legislation regulation, then secondly about the SUE survey, which in the case you mentioned, two primary causes at the beginning. First of all, in 2015, PHMSA basically said Colorado didn't have an the Colorado 811 didn't have an enforcement mechanism, so that was an important motivation. Then secondly, you had the Firestone incident in 2017. What did the PHMSA report? Was that something that had potential penalties for Colorado? If you didn't implement something to solve that problem, would Colorado be in contravention of some legal requirement from PHMSA?
Well, I don't know all the nuances of it, but my understanding is federal grants, federal funding could have been an issue for us in the future as far as trying to secure federal dollars based on the fact that we didn't meet federal requirements in that world. So it was more along that lines that it was a potential of a funding move on the federal administration part. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of changes that came from that. The gas pipeline regulatory group decided that they would also start mapping utilities as well, mapping pipelines and gas lines. And so there is a database of just gas lines and pipelines and wells throughout the state as well. And they're looking, we're trying to integrate with that too, because there's another good data source on that side of it. So PHMSA, yeah, I think it was more of them just coming in and saying, hey, you need to do better. You need to have some enforcement. You need to have some accountability on the utility company.
Right. And then Firestone happened, which just probably caused everything to bubble up.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And there were other examples. I just didn't show them, but we had a lot of other utility incidences that caused the media to come out, but also the political side, saw that there was a need for change. So
right. Yeah, I think everybody has had this. When you actually start looking at how much damage there is, this happens awfully frequently. The second question I had was that you mentioned that with a SUE survey that you tried to have the SUE survey completed by 10% design, right? So that meant that basically it means the engineers were able to design things not only knowing from surveyors, traditional surveying, what was above ground, but also what was below ground. And you said also that the data that was collected in the SUE survey was also available through your mobile cloud app to contractors, right? So that they would know what was underground as well. Presumably the engineers would try to design things not to minimize relocations and things like that. And I assume that your engineer, the design engineers and the contractors that work for CDOT are independent companies. Have you had feedback from them about how this has benefited them? In other words, have you had feedback saying this reduces risk for us, or something, or has reduced our cost, or we don't get these little surprises in the middle of our contracting where we all of a sudden we hit a gas line and the whole thing is held up for 3 weeks?
Oh, absolutely. We've actually been piloting this on a $1.2 billion I-70, Interstate 70 relocation, or not relocation, but redevelopment project in Denver. And we've had our contractor managing the entire subsurface utility mapping as they live, basically. Every day they're out there collecting data. They're managing their one-call excavation locates with it. But what the feedback I've received from that team is where they found efficiencies is whenever they daylight a utility, they collect it. Existing utility, they're collecting it. They know the data on it. They know where it's at. And then when one call locates come out, and if they mark it and it's in a different spot, and instead of saying, well, we'll rely on that one call location, we have data on that utility. It's over here. We know it's over here, and we can show you in the system. We can send you the information. So they send it to the utility company. It's then resolved rather quickly when it comes to the one call staking for excavation. But they're finding efficiencies that they can clear the dig areas quicker. They can reduce. They have more data on the existing utility infrastructure, so they feel like they do have a better handle on what is around them and under them, instead of, and so they're keeping very good organized records on their project limits and what's going on with any existing utilities, any relocated utilities, and so they're as-builting. They're documenting what's still in the ground, left behind. So there's a whole plethora of information that's coming out of this construction management, and it's pretty amazing the efficiencies that we're seeing with the contracting side of it. The contractors, I think, really see a lot of benefit. And we have another project going on right now that's just kicking off, and the contractor is already just starting. They feel like they have a better understanding wherever they're at on the project, of wherever they're standing, what is going on under their feet or next to them or next to their piece of equipment when it comes to the utility, subsurface utilities. So it is pretty amazing of what they're seeing and being able to understand as contractors from utility.
Just to follow up on that, can you envision that this might lead to lower priced bids, or in other words, that projects would cost less than they have in the past? I'm sure it's not your objective, but do you think it is going to make the whole process of construction more efficient? It's getting back to the productivity thing. In other words, could this make contractors more productive?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that it will. It's just going to give them a lot more control of what's going on, and they don't have to flip through utility plan sets that are, buried in hundreds of sheets of paper. So it just puts the technology right in their fingertips. It gives them the opportunity to build a team around it, utility inspection team or construction management team, just dedicated to watching and helping with the utility situation. And at the end of the day, when they turn the project back over to Colorado, the map is current. It's done. The as-builts are done.
Right. That's a good point. You're getting accurate, really accurate as-builts rather than those paper things, which were more as designed.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, Rob, thanks a million for this. I think we really have gained some insight into how this process worked in Colorado, and especially what the implications are of requiring a subsurface utility engineering survey before you do design. I mean, I think that is really, if there's one thing that Colorado has done, then I think is really a model of what everybody else should be doing. And I know some contractors already do, engineering firms, consulting firms are already doing this anyway, even without the legislation and regulation. But this is something I think is just going to catch on like wildfire.
I agree. And I think, where we saw a benefit is really creating a full process to where we capture that data and then have the ability to reuse it for the next SUE investigation and have new, updated records, so that the next time a SUE company has to go out and investigate a project, they have access to that data, and they have the ability to you know, to maybe say we can save money on the agency side, because there's maybe less effort that has to go into verifying what was in our database rather than starting from scratch. So that's also part of that process.
Instead of just painting the ground, we're actually capturing this information digitally. Okay, Rob, thanks a million for this. I really appreciate your time, taking the time from Colorado to speak to us today. And we will be back for Paige Tucker, who is also involved in Colorado. I think we're going to be back in about 5 minutes for that. So thanks again. Thanks again, Rob.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you all.